Operations in India have been impacted after volcanic ash from an Ethiopian volcano drifted across to India. Now, for perspective, this volcano has erupted for the first time in over 10,000 years. You've got images of that over here. It comes at a time when there has been intensive pollution over the entire national capital region, in fact, across the Indo-Gangetic Plain. Now, there have been a certain number of flights which have been impacted. 7 international flights were impacted, were in fact cancelled. 12 international flights were delayed. Airlines were ordered to strictly avoid all ash-affected routes and altitudes and adjust flight plans accordingly to ensure that flight safety was paramount. They've also been advised to report any engine or cabin anomalies immediately. Some carriers, including Indigo, Akasa and KLM, cancelled or diverted their flights. Meanwhile, the Indian Met Department has issued an update that the ash cloud will leave India's airspace and move towards China from this evening, from this night onwards. Be that as it may, as I mentioned, it comes at a time when there's been horrific air pollution across this entire region. The fact of the matter is that this particular ash cloud was high, which has perhaps saved us from an even worse situation. Joining us now, Sunil Dahiya, founder and lead analyst at Enviro Catalyst. Sunil, thanks very much for being with us. As I understand it, Vimlendu Jha also with us. Sunil, let me come to you first. As I understand it, this was between an altitude of 25 and 45,000 feet, this particular ash plume, ash cloud. Had it been lower than that, would we have had a bigger impact, let us say, in the national capital region?
No, definitely the height of this cloud that matters for Delhi NCR and not also for other regions. If the height of these polluted plumes is lower, then there are more chances of the pollutants being settled because this will settle somewhere. But because it is moving at a greater height in Delhi NCR and in the IGP region, the deposition will be way too lower compared to it would have been if the cloud would have been lower. And that means that since it has hit Delhi NCR region since yesterday night, the pollution levels haven't gone sort of really high suddenly. And the only reason for that is that this cloud is at a higher altitude and the deposition is very, very small.
Vimlendu, potentially what harm can this ash cloud cause us? I mean, is it possible for the deposits over here to still cause some sort of damage? Does it add to the pollution levels?
Not really, as in there was a fear because, we are actually talking about ash, we're talking about sulfur dioxide, we're talking about glass and other rock particles in that sense. So typically, if it was actually lower than where it is, indeed, this is what we are already suffering with, right? As right now, when we talk about AQI levels, and then in that carbon is one and sulfur is another component of overall ambient air quality. But the fact that it is actually so high, because right now, largely, if you look at it, almost the smog has become almost like our cover, and pollution largely what matters for AQI is largely 1 to 2 kilometers in this particular season. So therefore, we don't really think that this is going to affect the overall AQI, at least not right now. Of course, this is going to somewhere settle in the Tarai area, in the Himalayan area, and around China. But largely in Delhi NCR, I don't think this volcanic eruption or this entire plumes is going to have any impact so far.
All right. And Sunil, this comes obviously at a time when there is horrific air pollution across large parts of North India. Do we now increasingly have a sense that the worst may be over, particularly when it comes to, let us say, stubble burning in parts of Punjab, with that having come down somewhat? Or are we seeing stubble fires in other states as well continue? For example, Uttar Pradesh.
See, the stubble fires in Uttar Pradesh will not have any impact on Delhi NCR air quality because the predominant wind direction is from northwest to the east, and that is why farm fires in Uttar Pradesh doesn't impact the air pollution as much, at least right now. But one thing I would like to say, both the stubble burning incidents as well as this volcanic eruption which has come towards Delhi are a testament to the fact that pollution travels hundreds of kilometers. And that is why the solution to Delhi's air quality doesn't just lie within Delhi. We have to take actions in the larger area set. And even those big stacks at power plants, at the industries, which are 270-meter height, 250-meter height, when the pollutants are emitted at that height, they also travels to hundreds of kilometers. And that means that while the episodic events of firecracker burning and the stubble burning are over, the pollutants are still being released in Delhi from transportation, industries, waste, construction, as well as in the larger rail shed from all those sectors. And that hasn't come down, which means that the pollution is still there. Now, with the air getting colder, with the wind speed being low, we are still going to see severely polluted days over the coming weeks. But once the winter starts fading away, the temperatures increases, the wind speed increases, we might see slight relief. But otherwise, the toxic cocktail and the emissions which forms those toxic cocktails are still there. They have not been curtailed. It's been about 15 years that we've been discussing it every year, and no action seems to have been taken. The petrol consumption is increasing, private vehicles are increasing, coal-based power generation is increasing. Industries are still not being monitored in terms of what they are emitting, and all that is leading to this failure of not being able to provide clean air.
Sunil, just one more question. This is a once every sort of millennium, or Vimlendu, why don't you take that, sort of scenario which developed in Ethiopia? No one expected something like this to take place at all. In 12,000 years of scientific research, this is the first time this particular volcano went off. How remote or how rare is that?
So, of course, as in whatever that little that we've learned about this, of course, I'm not a geoscientist in that sense. But we know that this is a rare event, and there are many such rare events. But by the way, the fact that we are actually talking about this volcanic eruption, and in the same breath with air pollution, it also, what Sunil rightly said, that, there are more and more such events, of course, cannot be directly linked to climate event in that sense. But, when we are living in an era which is already a gas chamber, at least most part, almost 90% of India actually has poor to very poor to severe to dangerous air quality levels, and not just during the winter months. Throughout the year, Delhi's air quality is bad. And then when you have the ability of pollution or pollutants to travel for thousands of kilometers, and more climate events happening in our own geography as well as in distant geographies, in that sense, it is a warning sign. Volcanic eruptions, many times also earthquake and other phenomena directly cannot be linked to climate vulnerability or climate change, so to say. But yes, we are living in such eruptions of all kinds and events of weather and climate and pollution times, and therefore it just makes the situation more vulnerable. Imagine if these plumes were not really to 20,000 feet or otherwise at that altitude, as in it was slightly lower. Imagine the kind of havoc that it could actually create to an already gas chamber like Delhi NCR in that sense. And also, just to add to the previous question, Vishnu, that you had asked, Sunil, with regard to smog, with regard to stubble burning, I always hold that opinion that there's disproportionate attention given to stubble burning. No doubt the episodic sources of firecrackers and stubble burning needs to stop. Indeed, there are days that almost 20 to 25% of the contribution to ambient air quality of Delhi NCR is affected by stubble burning in that sense. But if you look at the 365 days graph of pollution, almost this burning of stubble perhaps happens for 4 weeks to 6 weeks at the maximum. And therefore, unless and until we actually focus on the perennial sources of pollution, so-called stable, all the time sources of pollution, which, as Sunil also rightly said, that almost 40 to 50% of it is vehicular pollution. We know that in the 300 square kilometer radius of Delhi, there are at least 15 thermal power plants that do not really follow the emission standards and are polluting, and indeed construction and other activities. So therefore, if we have to combat air pollution long term, indeed, we need to first understand the regional vulnerability or the potential of pollutants to travel thousands of kilometers. That's point number one. At the same time, not always think of pollutants coming from outside, because it gives us an excuse almost as if we are all right, someone else is polluting, versus we need to also focus and more so on our local sources. Right now, if Delhi has become a gas chamber, it's because Delhi's air is not able to run away, as in it's actually accumulating because of the temperature and wind speed, and therefore the local sources will have to be addressed, and not just in Delhi in that sense. When I say local, I don't mean just the Delhi state in that sense. We will have to look at Gurgaon, we will have to look at Faridabad, Ghaziabad, Noida, and that's where we cannot call ourselves a 3 crore population. We will have to call ourselves an 8 crore population in terms of NCT and these 5 towns that we're talking about. Because imagine such a dense population of 8 crores living in a small geographical location, which anyway has geographical disadvantage, and because of the meteorological conditions and rapid urbanization, all of this makes our lungs stunted, our children really asthmatic.
All right. Well, it is a frightening situation over there. And I think, Vimlendu, you make an important point that in as much as we speak about stubble burning, and we should, without any doubt, we face a perennial issue of air pollution, of pollution from multiple sources. It all adds up. I would suggest that what takes us, why we focus more on stubble burning this time around, is because it takes us over a certain edge. If we're looking at 500 plus, 600 plus, 700 plus PM 2.5, it is a matter of grave crisis, but all of it is a concern. We leave it there. Thank you both very much for being with us.